Check 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And in the...
So do you just want to fade me in? I'll just start playing.
So glad that you could join us this evening. I am Beth Schneider, and I've had the pleasure of coordinating this year's tea. It's a tea that I've seen nurture connections and provide a sense of stability and belonging to many of you. My thanks go out to the team that makes this evening possible, to the Board of Fellowship and the Christmas Tea team who remained flexible, committed, and hands-on as we prepared, to the youth who packed your Christmas tea bags, to the church staff and the volunteers who support the communications and the many touch points with you to make this evening possible, and to those on stage and behind the scenes. They all have efforts that make this evening possible. They allow us to settle in and begin our Advent journey. So an Advent journey is not like most trips. While hope, love, joy, and peace are words of Advent, this journey does not have a starting point, a set starting point, a destination that's designated by its route, or a predetermined destination. This is your journey. It's about becoming rather than being. It is about our learning and growth, the potential to learn about ourselves and the society in which we live. Anthony Bourdain wrote that journeys change us because they leave imprints on our memories and on our consciousness. There are two familiar Advent images that you may recall. One is Joseph leading the donkey that is carrying Mary, who's pregnant with Jesus. The other is the three wise men on their camels carrying their treasures. Each is shown crossing the desert alone. But they were not alone. Many others were walking beside them. And just like in our lives, each was on their own journey. They did stop and talk. They asked, "Have you seen the star? Where is a place to sleep? Where are you going?" Just like we might do on our own Advent journey. For some of you, this is your first Christmas tea. For others, it continues an Advent tradition. We are glad you are here with us tonight. Whether you are in Minnesota or far away, settled in alone or gathered with others around the table. So let us pause and now enjoy this year's Christmas tea.
What a blessing to join together this evening wherever you find yourself. And as our journey to the manger, as our Advent journey continues, your days are going to be filled with busyness and to-do lists. And this song begs the question, is there room in your heart for the Christ child?
A family hiding from the storm found a place at the keeper's door. It was first child was born to save a world so cold and hollow. A sleeping town they did not know that lying in a manger low, a Savior King who had no home has come to heal our sorrows. Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart has come to raise the lowly. Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart for God to write His story? You can come as you are. It may set you apart. You make room in your heart and trade your dreams for His glory. Make room in your heart. Make room in your heart. A mother holds the promise tight. Every wrong will be made right. The road is straight, the burden light. For in His hands He holds tomorrow. Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart? Is there room in your heart for God to write His story? You can come as you are. It may set you apart when you make room in your heart and trade your dreams for His glory. Make room in your heart. Make room in your heart. Make room in your heart. Make room in your heart.
Over 2,000 years ago, a young teenager was told that she would give birth to a king. And I can't help but wonder what was going through her head.
That your baby boy would one day walk on water. Mary, did you know that your baby boy would save our sons and daughters? Did you know that your baby boy has come to make you new? And this child that you've delivered will soon deliver you. Mary, did you know that your baby boy would give sight to a blind man? Mary, did you know that your baby boy would calm a storm with his hand? Did you know that your baby boy has walked where angels trod? When you kiss your little baby, you kiss the face of God. Oh, Mary, did you know? The blind will see, the deaf will hear, and the dead will live again. The lame will leap, the dumb will speak, the praises of the Lamb. was Lord of all creation. Mary, did you know that your baby boy would one day rule the nations? Did you know that your baby boy is heaven's perfect lamb? And the sleeping child you're holding is the great
Reading from Luke 2, 1-7, the birth of Jesus. In those days, a decree went out from Emperor Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration and was taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. All went to their own towns to be registered. Joseph went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. He went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and who was expecting a child. While we were there, the time came for her to deliver her child. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in bands of cloth, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn.
Good evening and welcome to the warm and inviting table that you're sitting around tonight. I'm Lindy Purdy. When the trees turn color and start to drop their leaves, my thoughts turn to special people and places, to magic and miracles, for it is time to consider another Christmas story. Tonight I will read my 18th original Christmas story. The first 12 were conceived completely in my imagination and flavored with hints of experiences and people who've been part of my life. However, the last 6 stories have been part of my life. They have been rooted in history, in my history. I've placed these stories in contexts that are familiar to me, places that I have known and loved, like Excelsior, where I grew up, in Puerto Rico, where I have a second home, or in the sleepy little town of Victoria before it became a cush golfing community. And this one, some of them are rooted in Wayzata, which has been my home for over 50 years. But tonight's story is taken right out of the history of Lake Minnetonka. So I guess the story could be considered historical fiction. It takes place on the western shores of Lake Minnetonka, at the site of my home on Fagerness Point, where I've lived since 1973. The area is called Saga Hill, and for those of you who are familiar with the lake, Saga Hill is the land area that's surrounded by West Arm, Jennings Bay, and Forest Lake, which is originally known as Frost Lake. It's been fun to dig into the history of this area, and I've had great fun researching with a team of researchers who are as excited as I am to know more about this obscure but familiar place. So I give my thanks to our tea coordinator, Beth, who had help from her daughters, Tammy and Tara, to my dear husband, John, who helped me with all the research. Thanks also to the West Hennepin County Pioneers Association, for they provided materials on this area. And I always have to say thanks to my partner, my editor, Cammie Farley, who has edited almost everything I have written in all the years in this place. As you look through the tea bag, that beautiful tea bag that's been put together for you by the fellowship team, you'll find many treasures. All of these treasures are related to the story that you're about to hear. So Beth, these bags are so beautiful. To all the hands who filled them and made them, a great gratitude from those who received them. This story is rooted in a true story, the story of my grandmother, Murmur, who was legally known as Myrtle Beverly Lindell. She was born in 1898, the daughter of Norwegian immigrants Gertrude and C. Olaf Lindell. The Lindells, along with their children Elma, who we knew as Tanta, Lillian, who we called Lala, and Gertrude, who became Dodo, Murmur and her brother Edward, settled in Minneapolis, Minnesota. At the turn of the century, the Lindells homesteaded a property on Lake Minnetonka, where they built a cottage in Saga Hill, which was a Scandinavian summer haven. As a child and young adult, my grandmother spent her summers at Saga Hill with her three sisters, Elma, Gertrude, and Lillian. Her brother Ed escaped this brutal summer ritual to stay in Minneapolis with his father. The Lindells were of small means, having arrived from Norway with a single trunk that held all their transportable possessions. Summers on Lake Minnetonka were essential to their existence. Their small plot of land gave them the opportunity to work and provide for the tough winters that lay ahead. Murmur loved those summers. She was a bit of a tomboy, and she loved her duties outside in the wild, beautiful surroundings of the lake. My husband John and I were privileged to hear Murmur speak lovingly of those days, foraging for wild berries, fishing for dinner, and gathering wood for the stove that cooked and preserved all the larder that would be used in the months to come. Her sisters were charged with hoeing and weeding and pickling produce and standing around that hot stove to produce all those important staples. They did not like that back-breaking, intensely hot, mosquito-ridden summers that nearly as much as my grandmother did. But Murmur was the only one adventurous enough to go into the woods or take a fish off of a hook. Back in the early 1900s, Lake Minnetonka was a grand and glorious place for wealthy city dwellers to spend their summers. But it was also inhabited by the working class, who found the area to be useful for their survival. By the way, just a month ago, both the Main Street of Excelsior and the Minnehaha were accepted into the historic register. My grandmother grew up during that era. When John and I were married, we bought our first and only house, which we still own, in 1973 at 1975 Fagerness Point Road on West Arm Bay. And Murmur was very much a part of our lives. We had a 19-foot runabout, and every summer we took her on a cruise past her old cottage at the end of Minneapolis Avenue in Saga Hill. It remained standing until her death in 1991. Now, of course, it's a place that has a mini mansion. So this story is right out of the pages of the stories that I heard from my Norwegian grandmother. Murmur went into great detail about her trips to the lake, taking the streetcar to the train station, the train to Spring Park, and a steamboat to her cottage. Just off the end of Fagerness Point, which, by the way, is translated from Norwegian as beautiful point, just off the end of that point is a private island named Deering Island that's named after a famed steamboat captain of the early 1900s. You can check out those routes and see a map of the area on the placemats that are in your gift bag. So far, all that I've told you is true, to the best of my knowledge. But my story, the story that I will tell you tonight, uses this historical context and adds my imagination to tell the possible stories of the characters of that time. The mysterious saga of Saga Hill. Once upon a time, more than 100 years ago, maybe closer to 150 years ago, there was a place, an Innu place, a place of the Minnetonka, a beautiful place of the big water. This place was just a day's wagon ride away from the growing city of Minneapolis. Many of the place names in this area originated with the native languages that were spoken in this area by the Dakota Sioux, the Ojibwe, and the Lakota peoples. Soon, rail lines were laid by railroad baron James J. Hill, and trains went westward from the big city to this beautiful place of Minnetonka to harvest trees for the rapidly growing big city. The trains also provided transportation from Minneapolis to the shores of Lake Minnetonka for city residents. This place was so Innu, so beautiful, and soon large hotels, like the Hotel Del Otero and the Hotel Lafayette, were built on the shores of the lake to provide vacation spots for wealthy summer visitors. And visitors came from all over the country and all over the world. This growing industry of summering at the lake brought large steamboats like the Minnehaha and private steamboats that acted as water taxis to deliver guests and residents to their shoreline destinations. A large amusement park was built on the Big Island for the thrills of summer visitors. Large groups of immigrants were arriving in the new land of America, and many of the Scandinavians among them were attracted to Minnesota, especially the Swedes and the Norwegians. The only thing they had in common were their Lutheran religion and a common rivalry that they brought with them from their homelands. A group of educated Swedish Lutherans and another group of Norwegian Lutherans from Augsburg College independently settled in a place on the eastern shores of what is now West Arm and Jennings Bay. These settlements were near geographically to each other, but the old rivalries lived on. Both groups held Sunday services and entertained lavishly. They were visited by many groups of missionaries, theologians, and religious dignitaries. Historians who recorded their stories tell of different meeting houses, different clergy, and different dignitaries visiting each of these compounds in the summers. Other Scandinavian immigrant families, far too poor to visit a fancy hotel or get an invitation from the elite Lutherans, homesteaded smaller properties in this area called Saga Hill. Saga is an old Norse word for story, and I'm confident that many great stories were told and lived out in this beautiful place. The Saga Hill Association was founded in the 1880s. Patrolling the waters of West Arm and Jennings Bay was a bewhiskered seaboat captain who provided transportation for both Lutheran colonies from the train station in Spring Park to their religious retreats, Captain Charles W. Deering. He drove a red-painted passenger steamer named the Florence Deering. No one knew much about Captain Deering, where he lived, where he was from, or whether there was even a Mrs. Deering. Amid the mystery, tales of his adventures and exploits grew and spread far and wide, at least among the various Lutherans that he frequently transported. One such tale went like this. Captain Deering had two wives, one named Florence, like his steamboat, and one of them a Lakota woman. That tale was based on an adornment that hung above the steering wheel of his boat that had a cluster of feathers, a beaded bracelet, and a compass engraved with the monogram FSG. Another tale claimed that Captain Deering was a medicine man. He used his steamboat to pick up passengers for medicinal treatments. This yarn began as people from far and wide came to purchase his wild raspberry tea. It was thought to have magic healing powers. Wild berries were plentiful around Saga Hill, as was ginseng. Many thought that ginseng was Captain Deering's secret ingredient. Some Lutheran mothers would not let their daughters ride on Captain Deering's steamboat without full body covering and escorted by an adult male, for rumors abounded about his activities at the end of Fagerness Point, where it was well known that the hotel crowd went for their moonshine and a night of prohibited partying. It was true that Captain Deering derived much business from the house of ill repute at the end of Fagerness Point. He was aware of the many myths that surrounded his identity, but he did nothing to dispel them. He remained a man of great mystery and suspicion to the Lutherans. Captain Deering also transported the homesteaders, and with him he was a little more relaxed. He never openly shared his story with passengers, but they often shared their stories with him. One of the immigrant families who homesteaded on Jennings Bay was the Lindell family. They were Lutheran and Norwegian, but never involved in either Lutheran community. The Lindells spent their summers at the lake strictly for survival. They desperately needed the food that they collected, grew, and preserved during their summer at the lake to make it through the long Minnesota winters. Their gardens were extensive and rich. Wild berries and roots were plentiful in the area, and the lake provided fish for their evening meals. Gertie Lindell even found a way to pickle the fish for their winter diet. The Lindells had their own stories about the notorious Captain Deering. They knew the captain because he often purchased wild raspberries and even some ginseng from them. And Mama Lindell sometimes traded her amazing raspberry jam for passage on the Florence Deering. Occasionally, Captain Deering shared a bit of his life with the Lindells. Myrtle Lindell was the one who could talk his ear off if he let her, and she was also an eager listener. Sometimes the captain shared a fish dinner with the Lindells, but only if Papa Olaf was present at the lake. When Captain Deering came to dinner, he always brought some trinkets for the girls that he had traded with the gypsies. Of course, the girls wanted to know all about the gypsies who wandered in this little part of the world. He didn't know too much, but he did know that they were afraid of the Lutherans. He told them that the gypsies and the natives were pretty close, but they were always wary of the summer crowd. It seemed that Captain Deering had made peace with all the residents of the land of the big water. He traded with the gypsies, and on occasion he was invited to a native sweat lodge. Captain Deering parked his boat out in front of the Lindell cottage whenever he was waiting for a return trip from the Lutherans. Myrtle watched for those times and made an effort to join him. Over time, she learned a few tidbits about this fascinating and mysterious man. She figured out that he had grown up somewhere out east, maybe Baltimore. She knew that there was once a woman that he could not talk about without tearing up. Myrtle guessed that her name was Florence, but the captain never confirmed that. She discovered that Captain Deering, now she called Charles as a friend, loved to read when she noticed two books tucked under the captain's chair. One book was by Mark Twain, and the other was a book of poetry, verifying that Charles was an educated man out here on the new frontier. He must have been an early arrival to the lake scene because he knew how to read the weather and the temperament of the lake, which made him a reliable sea captain. He was willing to talk about his special blend of raspberry tea, very willing to talk about that, but he never revealed its recipe. He joked about the Lutherans and their petty rivalry, but they became an important source of his income when his tea caught on with the clergy. In those days, there was great demand for the special, blessed, and sacred tea. Oh, the Lutherans, he often sighed. Once Charles mentioned a small boy living near Hotel Lafayette who was suffering with a respiratory condition that was not allowing him to thrive. Charles told Myrtle that he often brought the family his medicinal wild raspberry tea. He spoke of the boy with kindness and a tinge of sadness in his voice. And Myrtle secretly hoped that he would take her on one of his visits. Charles told Myrtle that the boy's mother, Marie, was a nurse, and that on occasion he'd been called in the middle of the night to take her to deliver a baby. The boy's father, William Potter, occasionally worked on the Florence Deering when it was in dry dock. It certainly was an interesting community that coexisted on the shores of Minnetonka in those early days. Over the course of many summers, Myrtle grew up to be a lovely young woman. Her family became financially secure, and they sold the little cottage in Saga Hill and moved back to the big city year-round. By this time, Captain Deering was getting on in years. He had had a hard life and was finding it more difficult to endure the cold, isolating winters and the demands of an old steamboat. Automobiles had arrived in the big city, and roads were being built out to the beautiful waters, and fewer passengers needed the steamboat taxis. As the Lindells departed their summer home for the last time, they gave Charles a farewell gift: a supply of dried beans and corn, some canned vegetables, a jar of Gertie's raspberry jam, and a small wooden heart hand-carved with the words love. Myrtle had worked on that for weeks. Charles gave them a goodly supply of his wild raspberry tea and a small bag of gypsy trinkets with a few arrowheads. They exchanged information, but doubted that their paths would ever cross again. The Lindell family grew and expanded. Most of them stayed in Minnesota. Myrtle married and had a family, but she never quite forgot the mysterious Charles, the steamboat captain. As it always happens, time speeds forward and wraps back and comes around again. Myrtle came to spend her later years with her family near the shores of the big lake of her youth. In 1973, her granddaughter, Suzanne, bought a home on Fagerness Point within sight of Deering Island and Saga Hill, of Myrtle's childhood memories. There was no trace that this beautiful point had ever been a steamboat stop or the site of a speakeasy. Steamboats had long been replaced by leisure boats in every configuration, but just being in that place brought back such memories of those summers at the lake. A few years later, Myrtle's granddaughter Suzanne saw a sale sign on the old church in Saga Hill. She'd wanted to see the inside of that church for some time, so she went in. It was a typical church rummage sale, but not anywhere near the scale of the sale de ramage at her home church in Wayzata. There were tables set up in the social room, an assortment of housewares, clothes, books, and the usual. She grabbed a few books and was ready to leave when she spotted an old, rusty tin box that caught her eye. There was something familiar about it, so she looked closer. She recognized the name on the tin. It jogged her memory and brought back the stories that she'd heard from her grandma Murmur about life on the lake so many years ago. The tin boasted of wild raspberry tea and bore the image of Captain Charles Deering. It was rusted shut, but impulsively she bought it for $1.50 without knowing what was in it. She could not pry the top off, so when she got home, she stuck it in her project room to look at it later. The box sat unopened and nearly forgotten in the rush of summer and school beginning. As Halloween and Thanksgiving quickly passed, Christmas came on with a rush. Suzanne got busy reshaping and rehabbing the costumes for the kids' Christmas pageant. It was a time for some new shepherd's cloaks. The old burlap was fraying and a little smelly. Note, contact the Thimblebees. The job of recruiting parents to help organize, decorate, and help with props and set design was the hardest of all. But the old faithfuls always pulled through. This year, Suzanne also agreed to host a Christmas tea for the seniors of the church, and that was taking most of her time. But what a joy. They were all so excited. It was in planning for this event and thinking about her grandmother attending that she remembered the antique tea box that she had found the past summer and the stories that it might hold. Maybe her Grandma Myrtle would be the special storyteller for the tea. Suzanne's excitement grew. She waited until the next Saturday and planned a special time with Myrtle to talk to her about the tea. She decided not to tell her about the tea tin. That would be a surprise for the tea party. But she did ask if Myrtle would tell her guests a little bit about her life on Lake Minnetonka. Myrtle took this opportunity on with gusto. She dug through her memories, made a few notes, and on the day of the tea, she shared the images of Inu, Minnetonka in the early 1900s. She described the exhausting journey that transported her family to the little cottage in great detail. She spoke of the full days of working the land and the lake for food and the interesting people she met. She even remembered the trinkets that came from the roving gypsies. The memories kept flooding back. Almost as an afterthought, she spoke of the steamboat captain Charles Deering. About him, she wondered most. She wondered if indeed Charles had married Florence, or what happened to Florence. And what about that little boy who had been so ill? Those questions remained unanswered. So the mystery of Saga Hill had reclaimed the imagination of my grandmother Myrtle, and in its telling, the imagination of the tea attenders as well. At the end of the story, Suzanne brought out that tea tin. Her brother had helped her to loosen the top so she could open it. And inside were many treasures that she found. A piece of old newspaper that held an obituary that read, Florence Randolph Deering, born in 1868, died in childbirth on Christmas Day, 1898, survived by husband Charles W. Deering, parents Walter and Edna Randolph, an infant son. The box also contained that ornament that was over the steering wheel of the Florence Deering that contained a compass and some beads and some feathers. It held some trinkets in a little bag, like the ones that had come from the gypsies, and an old map, tattered and torn, and in the bottom of the box. And also in that box, a wooden heart inscribed with the words, love. On the bottom of the box was inscribed, love one another, John 15:12. At that moment, a woman stood up and said, I'm Marion Lockwood. My grandfather was Joseph C. Potter. I think he was the little boy who was so ill. Our family has been telling that story for generations about the newborn baby boy who arrived on the doorstep of our cottage on Christmas Day, 1898. My great-grandmother Marie was surprised and elated, for although she had delivered many babies, she was unable to have a child of her own. She named the child Joseph. After a childhood of recurring respiratory issues, Joseph grew and thrived and was chosen to attend Johns Hopkins University on a full scholarship. Ultimately, he became renowned as a physician and a lead researcher on a team that developed the first vaccine for tuberculosis. Our family story, Marie said, always included the kind and generous seaboat captain who never failed to visit our family with much-needed provisions and homemade wild raspberry tea. We called him Captain Good, and on nice days he took Joe for a ride around Crystal Bay with the horn blasting. Marion was ecstatic to learn that Captain Charles Deering, she was sure that was Captain Good, was the captain of her family legacy, and she was anxious to share that news with her family. As it turns out, the special ingredient in Captain Deering's healing tea was love. Love as a father for a child. And I believe the special healing ingredient of Christmas is love as well. May your Christmas be filled with surprises, brimming with memories. And may the tea that you drink tonight and the love that you share along the way heal and make you whole as we celebrate love in its finest form. The love of a parent for a child and the love of that child for the world. We thank you, loving God, for the gift of your Son, Jesus, who showed us how to love. For unto us a child is born, unto us a child is given. Merry Christmas.
As we begin to close our time together, wherever you are, if you're seated in your kitchen, in your home, by yourself, if you're gathered in your living room with a group of people, we hope that you'll reach into your tea bag and pull out your candle. And if you don't have a tea bag, grab a candle there in your house. We're going to light them, and we're going to sing Silent Night together.
Silent night, holy night, holy
As we have done for all the years of our Christmas teas together, we have ended our time with a Christmas blessing. You'll find these words in the packet that you received, so read along with us. May an angel whisper words of hope in the silence of your night. May a star in the heavens beckon you to with its light. May God bless you with compassion on your journey to the manger. May you know the love of Christ in the kindness of a stranger. May joy fill your heart like an angel's chorus in the sky. May God wipe away your tears and comfort every sigh. May the cards we sing at Christmas give birth to music in your soul. May God's peace touch your life. May Christ's love make you whole.